week, Robert told us why we should use stories in business settings. And this week he follows up with the underlying structure of a story. I give you Robert Smith, Story Bones. Story Bones, Mr. Robert Smith.
When I was a little kid, my dad was a truck driver, and I used to love to travel along with him. This was the days when a radio in an automobile had tubes in it, and they often failed. The case in my dad's truck, there either was no radio or the radio had failed. He entertained me by telling me stories about his life and time. Turned out my dad was a really good storyteller. When I joined Toastmasters, the first occasion that I had to tell a story came as kind of a surprise to me. It was one of those meetings that we had where you came to the meeting unprepared for anything, prepared for anything. Because all the assignments were handed out after you got to the meeting, including the speakers. I was to give a speech. I told one of Dad's stories. Everybody loved it. They thought that was great. And so the next story I told was one that I took to a tall tales contest. I did well. The thing was, I was telling stories on the pattern I learned from my father. I had no idea of how to actually structure a story. I had no idea how to plan the structure of a story. I had no idea that the meat of a story is built on a set of bones. A lot of people like to call it an outline. I like to think of it as the basic internal structure, just as a skeleton is a structure in the body. So I think of it as story bones. When I finally began to learn about the story bones, learn what story bones were, was after I'd been a Toastmaster and I'd been in these speech contests, these storytelling contests. And I decided I would join the Storytelling Guild. And I joined the Utah Storytelling Guild, and then I began to do a lot of research about stories and the way that they were put together. And I discovered that stories have bones. Now when we talk about speeches, we talk about speeches that have a structure, and you write an outline. And in the Company Communicator Manual, it gives a sample speech outline that says it has an opening and a body with a main point and subpoints, and then you go through that 2 or 3 times, and then you come to a conclusion. And that's the structure of a story, or of a speech. That's the bones of a speech. Now the bones of a story are a bit different. They're just every bit as important. But the bones of a story, and this is from the Storytelling Manual, Let's Get Personal, and it gives an outline of a story. It says list the characters, establish the time and place, and then state the problem or the conflict. Now I'm going to take it a little bit further than that, because like I said, I spent a lot of years with the Storytelling Guild, and I've learned a lot of that stuff too. So this is the way a story goes. You introduce, like it says in the book, you introduce the time and the place and the lead character, at least one character. And then you tell about the problem that that character encounters. Now this is the interesting part. I'm going to tell you about every story that you've ever heard, every TV show you've ever watched, if it was a drama or a comedy, every movie that you've ever seen. Every one goes like this. In the opening, you meet the hero, well, the principal character. And that principal character encounters a problem. Does something to solve the problem, it fails. Try something different. It fails. Probably makes the problem worse. Try something else, it fails again. Again, it might even make the problem worse. And finally, try something that actually works. And when it actually works, then we find usually the climax happens at this time because that last thing is really intense, even if it's a comedy. This is really the point, you know, where Lucy has some explaining to do, you know.
Explaining to do.
And this is the point when you meet the climax of the story. And then after that, there's a bit where you explain how things have changed. And this is the way every story goes, whether it's a half-hour sitcom, or whether it's a 3-hour movie, or a 4-hour movie, whatever, you will find that same exact pattern. And it happens every story you hear. Even the little childhood stories that you tell your little children has that same pattern. So that's the bones of a story. And no matter what your story is, no matter what your focus is, no matter who you're telling it to, it's always got that kind of a skeleton. Sometimes in business applications, you don't want it to go that far. You just want to tell, okay, the characters, the place and time, what the problem was, and how it was solved. That might be the whole thing, but you've always got to end up with what happened afterwards. They lived happily ever after. The business became a success. This department finally made quota. So, whatever your application is, and I've told lots of little stories to little children, it's exactly the same thing, exactly the same pattern. The bones are always the same. Introduce the characters, encounter a problem, try to solve it, fail or succeed, or fail and succeed, fail and succeed. Finally, get to the end and explain how things turned out. The bones of a story. They're simple, they're strong. It's imperative that you use this when you're telling a story. People understand when you follow the proper pattern, they fall in with you. So use the story bones whenever you're telling a story. Thank you.